Hello, noble ones. Welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. Today, I would like to talk about a very important and very interesting topic. The knight in shiny armor. This is a very important topic because obviously I love the idea of the knight, and I think most of you do as well. But of course, as you already know, there is quite a lot of misconception, and from the misconceptions I would like to begin. In this video I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, although there are a lot of information that I would like to share. But essentially what I would like to do is to first debunk some very common misconceptions about the knight, and then talk about the actual historical figure of the knight. Of course, there will be other things that I would like to talk about, for example the coat of a medieval knight, but that will be content for another video. The first misconception I would like to talk about is probably the most famous misconception, the idea of a knight having to be hoisted on the saddle of their horses by the means of a crane. Now this really puzzles me, because often misconceptions come from a lack of knowledge and also a lack of experience, direct experience with the object that we are talking about. So for example, not many people actually have access to armor and weapons, and therefore there is a lot of misconception because of that, because people don't have to use their imagination. However, in this very topic I think you simply need to use common sense, and I will prove it to you in a moment. So first of all, it's not historical, it's not real. This was created, well, not really created by Hollywood, it was popularized by Hollywood and some films. But it wasn't created. This whole idea of knights not being able to move and being all, armors had been clumsy and knights not being able to ride their horses was actually a Victorian invention. It was their way of making fun of medieval people. It was a joke, that's all it was. But unfortunately, this joke actually replaced the real situation in a lot of people's mind. So let's just debunk this for a second. But first of all, it's true that armor is not that heavy. The weight of armor, I have already talked about this very briefly, but today I'd like to go a little bit more in details. The idea of armor being so heavy and so thick as impeding completely a person's mobility is preposterous. First of all, because you need armor during a battle, and battles could last quite a lot of time, and if you could not move, there was no point in wearing full plate armor, because it wouldn't have done what it was there to do, save your life. A knight in full armor, his armor would probably weigh between 20 to 25 kilos maximum, and talking about the more general idea of the knight that we have, the one in full plate armor, although that's not really, as I have said in the video I have dedicated to plate armor, the knight in full plate armor, it's not a really medieval thing, it's more of a late medieval thing, medieval idea, but we'll get to this in a moment. So when we imagine this knight in full plate armor, 20 to 25 kilos maximum, the exceptions to that, some jousting armors were heavier than that, but that's because in an actual joust you did not need to wear armor for that long, and also you did not need that much mobility because no one was actually trying to kill you. Occasionally it did happen historically that knights died during jousts, but it did not happen very often at all. So battlefield armor, you could run, you could jump, you could ride your horse, you could do lots of things. And there is a lot of iconography that helps us understand at this point. There is no iconography with cranes lifting people on their horses. Instead, look at this, and this, and this, and also this, and this. So what the knights actually did, they simply, if they really needed to, had someone help them. But in most cases, they actually didn't need. They could just ride a horse, just like anyone else does. And they have tried to actually recreate full perfect replicas of 15th century harness and full suits of armor, and then these people wore them. Even people who were not trained could ride a horse. They could stand up from the ground. It is not true that you can't do that, and I will prove this to you in a specific video where I will talk mobility in plate armor, where I will actually perform all these things. But for now, just take my word on it. I will prove it to you, and iconography, obviously. So moving to this idea of the knight in shining armor, having debunked the crane situation, the knight in shining armor. When we think of the knight in shining armor, we think of this one here, kind of knight. But this, when we see full plate armor, we're talking about at least 1420. And most of the cases, when we see pictures of museums like this, these here are 16th century full suits of armor. So basically, the full-plated armored knight is more of a late medieval Renaissance kind of warrior. So we're not really talking about high Middle Ages, okay? When we talk about high Middle Ages, we're talking about mail. Knights were wearing mail, and mail doesn't shine that much, not as much as plate anyways. Now, of course, there are lots of intermediate stages. There are situations where mail evolved into brigandine. There are situations where we have coats of arms. Of course, there are many intermediate things, but I can't really discuss about all these details in this video, otherwise I will not have enough time to continue talking about the actual figure of the knight. But I will dedicate a video on this, like all the different inner stages that helped reach full plate armor. But full plate armor was incredibly articulated. There are occasions in which you see sabatons, and I'll show you something very quickly. Sabatons, for example, like this, are completely articulated, as you can see. A sabaton is what you use for your foot, by the way. Okay, and I have seen actual real sabatons and replicas of real sabatons, but actual real sabatons in museums, and I hope if I can find that video, I'll post it on my channel eventually, where they actually had sabatons where they were made so perfectly that the tip of the toe could reach the ankle. Now, I challenge any of you to do that with your feet. So what that means is that particularly 16th century armor had reached such a perfection in flexibility that the armor could actually do movements that your body couldn't. The very concept of armor being so rigid and stiff that you couldn't move comes from the idea that armor is one piece. It's not. A full suit of armor is made of many different places, and all these places achieve mobility. Also, let me show you something. For example, the articulation of an arm. As you can see, I can even when we think of King Arthur, for example. Now, of course, there is a lot of, even if whether it was an actual king or whether it was a complete legend, there are a lot of different ideas and opinions on this, and I will make a video dedicated to this to explore this topic together and perhaps talk about it in the channel. However, even if it was real, historically speaking, the King Arthur, we have the first. We have some people who date the history, the tale, to the 6th century. So we're talking about slightly not too long after the Romans left Britannia, and in that case, sorry, but male. But even if it wasn't, and it was, we do have examples and tales about King Arthur in the 11th century, in the 10th century. Even if it was in the 12th century, we're still going to talk about male mostly. So King Arthur, I know that looks very good, and I really like the looks personally, but again, it's probably wasn't wearing that, you know. Now, another misconception is the lance rest. Now, what was the lance rest for? The lance rest, for those of you who don't know, slightly after the development of the full breastplate, which, so we're talking about late 14th century, we see these pieces of metal sticking from the right side of the breastplate. What were they for? Well, lance rest is a bit of a deceiving name because it feels as if they were there to sustain the lance. But honestly, if you have ever handled a lance, if you put it underneath your arm, underneath your armpit, it doesn't really weigh that much. So it wasn't really there to sustain the weight of the lance. It was there as a shock absorber after impact, and also to avoid the lance from slipping, okay, underneath your arm. Those were the two main reasons why you had a lance rest. And most lance rests as well could either be taken away after the impact if you had discarded your lance, or many could actually be hinged up so that they wouldn't impede you if you were starting to use the sword. Also, one last thing about this is that if you really needed a crane to lift a person, a knight, on his horse, then how many cranes were they to carry? For example, not only during tournaments, but during battles. If you had 1,000 knights, how many, like, I don't think that with a dozen cranes, it would have probably taken you months to have everyone on the horse. Maybe not months, I'm exaggerating of course, but it's just common sense. And also, even during a tournament, why building a full crane, probably quite a few cranes, instead of using simply a stool? If it really was so difficult to get on the horse, just use a stool and you'll be fine. You can get there. And please, don't give me that thing that people in the Middle Ages were primitive and couldn't come up with the idea, because please keep in mind that people in the Middle Ages are the same who built this. So we're talking about advanced people. Also, the knight already appeared. When we think of for example, the Norman conquest, also the Normans were knights, and this was the idea of the knight. If we think of the Templars, or the Crusaders, this was the idea of the knight. And if we think of when we already had full breastplates and surcoats, for example, and full surcoats and they're nice and colourful, then this could also be a knight. And then we think of the late medieval, and so 1420 and the full plate of armour, and this was a knight. So all these are knights. So you see how the concept of the knight is very deep, and it really depends on what century we're talking about and what country we're talking about, of course. It is now, as you know, historical wearing time. Alright then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments below what's your favourite kind of knight. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.